Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back way back into the land of pyramids, pharaohs, and gods who judged your every move. Ancient Egypt. Sounds romantic, right? Temples glowing in the sun, the Nile sparkling golden sarcophagi shining in torchlight. But here's the truth behind the glittering masks and glorious tombs was a brutal, sweaty, sun-scorched grind. So what if you had to live just one day in ancient Egypt? Spoiler, the sun won't be your friend, and the Nile isn't exactly your luxury bath. Before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button if you're into this kind of time travel content. Subscribe if you want more stories that pull back the curtain on the past. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? I love seeing how far this journey reaches. All right, get comfortable. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, because trust me, you're going to need it. Welcome to ancient Egypt, the land of pyramids, divine kings, and relentless ultraviolet punishment. The second your eyes flutter open, the sun is already in full attack mode. It's not just peeking through your window, it's blasting through the woven reeds of your hut like a cosmic hairdryer set to desert inferno. No curtains, no glass, definitely no AC. Just raw heat baking you alive before you've even sat up. You're lying on a straw mat, barely cushioned with a linen cloth acting as your sheet. And that cool Nile breeze travel documentaries love to mention gone. Maybe it died around 2 to 800 BC. Maybe it's just on break. Either way, it's nowhere near you. By the time you drag yourself outside, it's already pushing 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 Celsius, and it's not even mid-morning. Your tunic linen. Light, yes, but it's basically the ancient version of wearing tissue paper in a sauna. And sunscreen, please. No SPF, no aloe, no baseball cap. The ancient workaround was smearing on oil if you were rich, or mud and crocodile dung if you weren't. And no, it didn't smell like a tropical breeze. Midday hits, and the stones beneath your feet are hot enough to slow roast lentils. Shade is a rare luxury. If you're lucky, you might find some shelter behind a sweating mud brick wall. But even that offers the same relief as hiding behind a radiator. You're glistening like a rotisserie chicken in a temple offering. But remember, complaining is not advised. Ra, the sun god, is watching. And in this world, the hotter the day, the more powerful he feels. If you're melting into the earth, it's not heat stroke, it's a divine compliment. Hydration, humility, and a tolerance for feeling like meat in an oven. That's what you'll need to make it through the morning. And the best part, this is just the beginning. You finally get up off your scratchy mat, hoping maybe a splash of water will help. The Nile is nearby. Good news, right? Sort of. Because while this legendary river might be the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, it doesn't smell like salvation. Instead, it smells like a swamp, and a fish market had a toxic relationship. You can smell the Nile before you see it. The banks are teeming with bugs, frogs, and creatures that shouldn't exist outside a fever dream. But this is your bath. Forget soap. That hasn't been invented yet, and even if it had, you couldn't afford it. What you've got instead is the original exfoliant sand. That's right. You scrub down with what's basically nature's sandpaper and call it a skincare routine. Squeaky clean, not really. But now, your skin is technically smoother and only moderately more bruised. Laundry, same spot. You beat your linen tunic against a rock while keeping an eye out for crocodiles. Because yes, they live here too. And every so often, someone upstream might drop off a few, let's say, uninvited extras, runoff waste, maybe even the occasional funeral boat. Still, the Nile is sacred. You use it, You respect it, you fear it, and somehow you also drink from it. If you live in a bigger city, like Memphis or Thebes, you might have access to a public basin. If not, it's Nile or nothing. And don't even ask about privacy. You're bathing next to neighbors' livestock, and maybe an ibis or two judging your every move. Water jars are filled, hoisted onto heads, and carried back to your home before the clay walls start to crack from the heat. It's daily, it's necessary, and it's slightly traumatic. The Nile gives and the Nile takes, and today it's taken your dignity and maybe your last nerve. Now that you're slightly less sticky and significantly more paranoid about leeches, it's time for breakfast. Here's the culinary breakdown: no omelets, no yogurt, parfaits, no iced matcha, anything. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less about flavor and more about fuel. You squat in the corner of your hut, or maybe sit on a low stool if you're lucky enough to own one. Your menu: bread, just bread, dense, coarse, sometimes hard enough to double as a building material. It's made from emmer wheat or barley and baked in clay ovens that rats might also consider a timeshare. And because your grinding tools are made of stone, your bread comes pre-seasoned with sand. You're literally chewing rock. And this, folks, is your first bite of the day. Then comes the beer. But hold on. Don't picture a cold pint. This isn't a Friday night brew. It's thick, warm, cloudy, and looks like someone tried to blend oatmeal with swamp water. Children drink it not for fun, but because it's actually safer than Nile water. It's basically drinkable bread that's gone a little sour. So yes, your meal today is grain slurry and mineral-enriched bread bricks. If you hit the breakfast jackpot, you might have an onion. Maybe some dried dates. Protein is a fantasy unless someone caught a fish and didn't eat it on the spot. You eat while swatting flies, holding your cup in one hand and using the other to shield your face like you're protecting state secrets. This is the high point of your diet. Function over flavor. You eat so you don't pass out in the fields later. Bon appetit. By now, you've had your sand-infused bread, your lukewarm beer smoothie, and maybe 30 seconds of pretending your life isn't covered in bug bites. But now, it's time to face the real reason most Egyptians woke up work. And trust me, you're not ready. All right, let's talk about work. Because if you thought the sun was harsh and breakfast was disappointing, wait until you experience the ancient Egyptian workday. Now let's be real. Unless you're a scribe, a priest, or the child of a noble, spoiler alert, you're not. Your job is going to be rough. We're talking physical labor. From the moment the sun peeks over the horizon until it finally shows mercy and disappears behind the dunes. Let's say you're a farmer. Your day starts ankle deep in Nile mud. You're pulling weeds, planting seeds, or digging irrigation channels under the not-so-gentle supervision of an overseer who treats yelling as both hobby and profession. Your tools are basic wooden plows, crude sickles, and your own two hands. If your back doesn't hurt, you're probably doing it wrong. Now, if you're a laborer, congratulations. You've just unlocked nightmare mode. You're part of a workforce building temples or royal tombs, which means you're hauling multi-ton blocks of limestone or sandstone up ramps made of dirt, sweat, and hopes. There are no shoes, no gloves, and definitely no safety harnesses. If you trip, that's a broken ankle. If you break a tool, that's your fault. If you slow down, you're replaceable. Still think you can handle it? All right, let's crank it up another level. Imagine working on a pharaoh's tomb. You're not just lifting stones, you're chiseling out burial chambers deep within a mountain, carving hieroglyphs, sculpting statues, and polishing everything to perfection. And you don't just have a boss, you have a divine deadline. If you mess up a pharaoh's final resting place, you're not getting fired. You might just be buried in it, and not in the fancy sarcophagus way. Now, let's talk about women. Because if you assumed you'd get to stay home and avoid the worst of it, think again. Domestic life is also work, and it's relentless. You're grinding grain by hand. We're talking hours of pushing a heavy stone over another stone while the dust creeps into every crack of your skin. You're hauling water, cooking meals over an open fire, weaving linen from flax cleaning, child rearing, tending animals. And if it's planting season, guess what? You're out in the fields too. Your only break, when the baby finally sleeps for 7 minutes. That's it. That's your you time. There are no weekends, no PTO, no ergonomic anything. The sun is your boss. It tells you when to start and when to stop. And when it finally sets, you stumble home looking like a mud sculpture just barely held together by grit and sheer willpower. This isn't just physical exhaustion, it's spiritual fatigue. And just when you think you can finally grumble about it, don't. Because here's the kicker: in ancient Egypt, complaining wasn't just frowned upon, it could get you punished severely. See, your boss isn't just a supervisor, he's the pharaoh. And he's not a regular king, he's a god, literally. The living embodiment of Horus, son of Ra. He's divine, untouchable, and whatever he says is cosmic law. If the crops fail, that's not the weather. That's you not praying hard enough. If you question his rule or even joke about it, you're not just disrespecting authority. You're committing blasphemy, and blasphemy comes with consequences. You might get whipped. You might get shackled. You might end up doing a lot more than carving tomb walls. You might become part of them. And don't think you'll ever meet the guy. If you're a commoner, the closest you'll get to the pharaoh is during a state procession, watching his golden boat float past, surrounded by guards, priests, and more wealth than you'll ever see again. You do see him, though, everywhere. His face is on statues painted across temple walls, carved into monuments, even pressed into bread molds. His name is chanted in every ceremony, his image made deliberately larger than every other figure in every mural. Not because artists got carried away, because the law required it. And if you happen to work on one of his royal projects, like building a pyramid or a giant temple, you're expected to feel honored. You say it out loud too. Even if your legs are cramping and your hands are raw, you say, "It is a joy to serve." Because not saying it, that's dangerous. And don't even think about rebellion. Pharaohs don't take kindly to disobedience. History tells us that villages who tried to withhold taxes or complain about grain quotas, they disappeared, erased, entire towns flattened as a warning. You step out of line, you're not just punished, you're forgotten. So yeah, in ancient Egypt, the pharaoh is more than just a king. He's the sun in human form. He shines and you sweat. He commands and you obey. And if you don't, your story ends early and your afterlife plan gets canceled. Now, you've survived the labor. You've dodged divine wrath. But there's still one enemy you can't avoid. One thing that clings to your skin, gets in your food, and follows you everywhere. It's sand. Sand is your new best frenemy. It's in your shoes, in your clothes, in your eyes, in your ears, Yeah, it's everywhere. And guess what? You can't beat it. Let's talk about your real ever-present roommate in ancient Egypt's sand. It's not just outside your home. It's in your home. It's not just on the ground. It's in the air, in your bed, in your mouth. It's basically your third meal of the day, your clothing accessory, your personal exfoliator, and your mortal enemy. Start with what you're wearing. You're in linen. It's light, breathable, perfect for the desert, in theory. But linen does nothing to keep the sand out. It sneaks into your tunic like it's invited. You can't shake it off. You can't brush it away. And somehow, it gets into places that defy anatomical explanation. Want to eat good luck? Your bread was already suspiciously crunchy this morning. That's because the grinding stones used to make flour. They shed grit. So now, congratulations, you've got stone bits baked into your meal. Every bite is like chewing gravel. This isn't just a joke. Archaeologists have studied ancient Egyptian teeth and found them worn flat like river pebbles. Imagine filing your teeth down every day just by eating. And no, there's no dental plan. Your home, also sand-infested, mud brick houses are full of tiny cracks and openings. Windows, they don't have glass, just holes. Every gust of wind delivers a personal gift from the Sahara, straight to your sleeping mat. Your cooking pots, sand, your bed sand, your sandals. Well, if you even have sandals, they're made from reeds or leather, and they don't do much. Most people go barefoot, so every step outside is like walking on a skillet covered in gritty powder. Now picture this: you're walking through the market, talking to your neighbor, maybe admiring a pottery stand. Then it hits, not a breeze, a wall of wind, a sandstorm. Everything goes orange-brown and blurry. The sky disappears. Visibility drops to zero. It's like the world gets erased in real time, and all you can do is pull your tunic over your face and hope you don't inhale a pint of dessert. Your skin blasted, your eyes burning, your dignity gone. The sand doesn't care if you're praying, working, bathing, or sleeping. It finds you, always. So yeah, sand isn't a background detail in ancient Egypt. It's a full-blown character in your daily drama. You can't run, you can't hide, you just endure. All right, enough about sand. Let's talk about what really controlled everything in your life: religion. In ancient Egypt, religion isn't something you do on the weekend. It's your schedule. It's your insurance plan. It's the reason you woke up, the reason you eat, the reason you don't mouth off about your neighbor's weird-looking goat. It controls everything. Every town has its own set of gods. And I mean gods, plural. Not one, not 2 dozens. You've got Ra, piloting the sun across the sky. You've got Thoth, the ibis-headed god of writing and moon calendars. You've got Sobek, who's part crocodile and part walking nightmare. Bastet, the cat goddess, who basically runs the PR department of the pantheon. Every god has a domain. Every domain affects your life. You wake up. You thank Ra. You stub your toe. That could be Set, the god of chaos. Better say a quick prayer, just in case. You spill your beer. Might want to leave an offering for Hathor, so your day doesn't spiral into divine disaster. Before every meal, you offer a bite to the gods. Before every sleep, you whisper a plea to be left in peace. Because spirits, ghosts, demons, they're real. And they're moody. And then there's death. You'd think it'd be simple. You die. You're gone. The end. Not in Egypt. Death is just the beginning of your most complicated to-do list yet. You've got to get buried properly. You need the right rituals. You need the right words said over your body. You need to pass the ultimate divine exam. Here's how it works. You arrive in the Hall of Ma'at. She's the goddess of truth, justice, cosmic order. Your heart gets weighed on a golden scale against her feather. And if your heart is heavier because you lied, cheated, or cursed your neighbor's donkey, you don't just fail. You get eaten by Ammit, a creature that's part crocodile, part lion, part hippo. Basically a nightmare built in a myth lab. And when she eats your heart, your soul is gone. Not just dead, erased. No afterlife. No second shot. just void. But if your heart's light, if you are honest, generous, and spiritually diligent, then congrats, you enter the field of reeds, the Egyptian version of paradise. Crops grow forever. The Nile sparkles. The sun shines, but not murderously. You hang out with your family, your pets, maybe even your favorite priest if he made it too. And this afterlife wasn't just some vague dream. Egyptians prepared for it hard. They built tombs. They filled them with food, tools, jewelry, and even little figurines called Shabtus magical servants that would work for you in the next world. Imagine planning your afterlife chores before you're even dead. But here's the wild part. None of this felt weird to them. It was normal. They didn't dread death. They trained for it. They believed that if they followed the rituals and stayed on the God's good side, they could literally cheat the void. It was a complicated, beautiful, slightly terrifying system of order. And for most Egyptians, it brought meaning to the chaos. If you lived well, you got eternity. If you didn't, well, good luck explaining that to a soul-eating monster with hippo feet. And we're not done yet. Because even if you lived, right, stayed clean, said your prayers, and avoided divine wrath, there was still another challenge waiting. Your health. Ancient Egypt had doctors, but not like what you're thinking. No lab coats, no antiseptics, no take two and call me in the morning. Nope. You're about to meet the intersection of medicine, magic, and optimism. All right, so let's say you've survived the heat, the labor, the Nile bath, the gods, and a sandstorm or two. You're still standing, barely. But now, you're not feeling so great. Maybe you've got a splitting headache, a rash that's spreading in all the wrong ways, or your foot's starting to swell after stepping on something sharp in the mud. Welcome to ancient Egyptian healthcare. And let me warn you right now, it's about to get weird. You're not heading to a hospital. That doesn't exist. Instead, someone fetches the SWNW, the local physician. And to be fair, this person probably knows more about anatomy than you'd expect. Egyptians were advanced for their time. They had medical scrolls, surgical tools made from bronze, and a surprising grasp of how the human body worked. They even had a basic understanding of how infections could spread, sort of. But, and this is a big, but science in ancient Egypt was never just science. Every physical ailment had a spiritual or magical explanation. Got a stomach ache? Could be something you ate. Could also be a curse. Or maybe your dead uncle's spirit is mad because you didn't leave him enough beer in his tomb. So, treatment always starts with a blend of ingredients and incantations. Let's say you've got a nasty cut. Your doctor smears it with a paste made from honey and moldy bread. Believe it or not, that actually kind of works. Honey is antibacterial, and mold contains early penicillin properties. That's real medicine. But before it's applied, the healer chants a spell. Because, hey, just in case your infected toe is the work of an angry serpent spirit, better cover your bases. Got a headache? Here's what they might try. Crushed onions rubbed into your scalp while someone recites a hymn to Thoth. For a cough, maybe you'll drink warm beer mixed with herbs. If that doesn't work, you might end up with a chest plaster made from dates, cow dung, and maybe lizard blood. All topped off with a prayer, obviously. Now, you've got an eye infection. You know the kind you'd hit with antibiotic drops today. Instead, you're getting a mixture of ochre copper shavings and beer smeared on your eyelid while your local priest doctor whispers a plea to Horus. If your eye heals, praise the gods. If it doesn't, well, maybe you offended the wrong deity. Need surgery. That happened too. Egyptians performed basic procedures like draining abscesses, setting broken bones, and stitching wounds with linen thread. But there's no anesthesia, no painkillers, just a sharp knife, a steady hand, and probably someone holding you down while you scream into a cloth. As for dental care, let's not. Seriously, with all the sand in their bread, Egyptian teeth were worn down by their 20s. Cavities weren't common, but infections, totally. And if one got bad enough, your options were grim. Either live with the pain, die from it, or let someone yank the tooth out with something that looks like a rusty blacksmith's pliers. There's no Novocaine, just screaming and regret. And then there are the charms. Always the charms. You're never really healed unless someone ties an amulet around your neck, usually a small carved figure of a god or animal. Even childbirth, which was as dangerous as it was sacred, involved the goddess Taweret, a hippo-bodied protector of mothers and babies, along with incense chanting and hopefully a very patient midwife. So yeah, medicine in ancient Egypt was part science, part spirituality, part blind hope. And you better believe in the gods, because sometimes that's the only thing standing between you and your next breath. Now, while we're on the subject of daily life, let's talk about something a lot of people forget when imagining ancient times: women. Because here's something unexpected. Ancient Egyptian women actually had more legal rights than many women did in later civilizations. No joke. Women could own land, run businesses, inherit property, even sue people. They could initiate divorce and take men to court if the marriage turned sour. That's huge, especially considering that thousands of years later, women in other parts of the world were still being treated as property. So, sounds like a pretty solid time to be a woman, right? Not so fast. Legal rights don't always equal an easy life, because day-to-day ancient Egyptian women worked hard just like the men. Maybe harder. If you're a woman, your day starts before sunrise. First task: grinding grain. You're kneeling on the ground, hunched over a slab of stone, pushing another heavy stone back and forth until your arms ache. It's not a quick chore. It takes hours, and you're breathing in flour dust the whole time. Next, you haul water. And I don't mean you walk into a kitchen and turn a faucet. You walk down to the Nile, fill up jars as big as your torso, and carry them back balanced on your head in the scorching sun. That's just to start the day. Then you're cooking meals, likely for a whole family, tending to kids, feeding animals, spinning thread from flax, weaving linen, cleaning, making pottery, maybe helping out in the fields during planting season. Break time. There is none. The only thing that resembles a break is when your toddler finally falls asleep for 20 minutes and you get to sit still for once. But you're probably still preparing the next meal or fixing a broken clay pot while that's happening. Childbirth. Oh, it's real. And it's terrifying. Midwives are there, thank goodness. But there are no epidurals, no disinfectant, just prayers, incense herbs, and a whole lot of pain. And if things go wrong, there's no emergency wagon coming down the road. There's just a lot of hope and ancient magic. Now, fashion light linen dresses for women, just like the men's tunics. It's breathable, yes, but it doesn't protect you from the sun. And there's no underwear. Also, no shoes. You're barefoot most of the time, walking over burning hot sand or sharp rocks. Every step is a gamble. You want makeup? Great. Egyptians loved cosmetics. Women wore eyeliner made from powdered minerals like galena and malachite, applied with sticks that looked suspiciously like toothpicks. They also used scented oils, perfumed wax cones that melted into their wigs, and lip color made from red ochre mixed with fat. But a lot of it lead-based, so beauty, with side effects. If you were born into wealth, things were different. You might be educated. You might run your household like a business. You might be a priestess or work in the temple. If you were really lucky and royal, you might rise to real power, like Hatshepsut, who became pharaoh in full ceremonial garb, beard, and all. But most women, they lived a life of non-stop movement and non-stop responsibility. They weren't oppressed legally, but they were pressed hard by the sheer weight of survival. Still, here's what's amazing. Egyptian women did have a voice. They signed contracts. They kept their property after marriage. They could even pass it on to their daughters. Compared to what came later in other ancient empires, that's revolutionary. But was it comfortable? Not even close. By now, the sun's beginning to dip toward the horizon. You're tired, hungry, itchy from sand, and probably covered in sweat bug bites and Nile residue. It's time to think about resting. But ancient Egypt doesn't just let you chill. Because, guess what? Your day's not over. You still have to make it through death. And trust me, it's not what you think. All right, so you've hauled your water baked, your bread ground, your grain endured. The blazing sun dodged divine wrath and maybe even survived a snake bite cured with lizard blood and a prayer. You're absolutely wiped. Surely now you get to rest, right? Not quite. Because in ancient Egypt, rest isn't just about sleep. It's about eternity. And before you ever get a proper nap, you've got to prepare for the biggest, longest, and most important phase of your existence, the afterlife. Here's the thing. Ancient Egyptians didn't fear death the way we often do. They planned for it meticulously, like full-on spreadsheets if they had them level of planning. You didn't just die, you transitioned. And that transition, it was full of ritual steps, tests, and paperwork of the soul. Let's walk through it. You die. Sad, yes, but also a lot of work. Your family kicks into overdrive. If they've got the resources, your body goes through mummification, one of the most elaborate, expensive, and symbolic processes ever created. Step 1. Remove all the squishy bits. That includes your liver, stomach, intestines, and lungs. They're each placed into separate jars called canopic jars, each protected by a specific deity. Your heart. That's kept in your chest because it's going to be judged later. Your brain, tossed. Apparently, they didn't see it as all that important. Sorry, neuroscience. Then your body is covered in natron, a type of natural salt, to dry it out. This takes weeks. After that, you're wrapped in layers and layers of linen, often with magical amulets tucked in between for protection. The wrapping alone could take up to 15 days. And if your family is wealthy, your mummy gets painted, perfumed, masked, and sealed in a lavish sarcophagus decorated with spells and scenes from your life. If you're poor, no gold, no paint. You get wrapped in old fabric and placed in a shallow pit with maybe a piece of bread and a beer. Still better than nothing. Because in Egypt, even the poorest soul hoped to reach the field of reeds, that eternal paradise. But before you get there, oh, there's a journey. First, stop the Hall of Two Truths. This is where your soul stands trial before a tribunal of 42 gods. Not one, not a panel of judges. 42. You have to recite the negative confession, a list of things you didn't do. I did not steal. I did not lie. I did not kill. I did not disrespect sacred animals. I did not covet my neighbor's goat. That last one's important, trust me. If the gods believe you, great. You move on to the next step. If not, well, it's been nice knowing you. Because next comes the infamous weighing of the heart. Remember, your heart is the seat of your soul. It contains your deeds, your truth, your essence. And it's weighed against a feather. Not just any feather, the feather of Maat, goddess of justice and balance. If your heart is lighter or equal in weight to the feather boom, you're in. Welcome to the field of reeds. Unlimited crops, eternal sunlight. No blisters, no sand in your bed, and possibly a pet duck that follows you around forever. It's peaceful. It's beautiful. It's what you lived your whole life hoping to reach. But if your heart's heavier, enter Amit. This isn't just a creature. This is your worst nightmare's worst nightmare. She's part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, and she's not here to counsel you. She's here to eat your soul, not punish it, not exile it. Just devour it into eternal nothingness. Game over. You don't pass go. You don't get an afterlife. You get erased. That's why Egyptians took this so seriously. Entire lives were structured around getting ready for this moment. Tombs were prepped. Amulets were chosen for specific purposes. The Book of the Dead, essentially a spiritual cheat sheet, was copied, purchased, and buried with the body. It included spells, prayers, and instructions like, say this when facing the crocodile god, or don't forget to compliment Osiris. And for those who couldn't afford a full tomb, they still tried. Maybe a simple coffin? A clay jar with a personal prayer. Even just carving their name somewhere was a way to gain a foothold in the eternal realm. Because here's the rule: if your name is remembered, your soul lives on. If it's erased, you vanish. But get this, getting into the afterlife wasn't the end. It was the beginning of forever, which meant your tomb had to hold everything you might need: food, clothing, tools, perfume, jewelry, statues, even little clay figures called shabtis. These were like supernatural interns who would do your chores for you in the next life. Think of them as the ancient version of hiring someone on Fiverr for eternity. And the more you had, the better your afterlife. That's why tomb robbery was such a massive problem. But we'll get to that in a later part. For now, just understand this: death in ancient Egypt wasn't just a moment, it was a process. It required money, planning, spiritual purity, and a whole lot of divine navigation. But hey, say you pass all the tests. Say your soul is clean, your heart light, and your God satisfied. Welcome to the field of reeds. It looks like Egypt, but better. The crops grow without effort. The Nile flows without flooding. The sun is warm, but never deadly. You're reunited with loved ones. Your dog may be even your favorite donkey from childhood. And best of all, you never have to haul grain again. So yeah, the afterlife was the ultimate goal. But until then, you've got another day to survive. And we're not even through it yet. Because remember, this is still ancient Egypt. And tomorrow brings more heat, more sand, and a surprise twist waiting around the corner. But before we get there, let's go back to the present moment. You've survived this long. Time to eat dinner, wind down, and maybe, just maybe, get a few hours of sleep on your scratchy straw mat before sunrise slaps you in the face again. All right, the sun has finally dipped below the horizon. The heat is backing off for now, and you've made it through another punishing day in ancient Egypt. You're scraped up, half sunburned, full of sandy bread, and every muscle in your body is wondering what it did to deserve this. Time for bed, right? Well, almost. You've still got evening chores, because there's no such thing as done in a society where survival is a full-time, no overtime, sweat until you drop commitment. Dinner. Pretty much the same as breakfast. More bread. Maybe a little leftover beer porridge. If you're lucky, some onion or dried fish. There's no big feast waiting. No herbs and spices. And forget dessert. Your treat tonight is finishing your food before the flies do. By the time you're done eating, your home is dark. There are no light bulbs, no phone screens, just a flickering oil lamp maybe if you can afford it. Otherwise, it's the moonlight, and that's assuming the wind hasn't kicked up a cloud of sand that turns everything into darkness and grit. You settle into bed, which is either a raised wooden frame with woven reeds if you're a little better off, or a straw mat on the floor if you're like most people. You try to sleep, really, but it's not easy. The air is heavy, the bugs are relentless, and the sand, still everywhere. It's in your nose, your ears, your clothes. There's a decent chance a beetle or two will crawl across your leg in the middle of the night. You just brush them off and keep dreaming. Or try to. Because dreaming in ancient Egypt, that's not just subconscious junk. Dreams are messages, visions, warnings from the gods. Every weird animal that pops into your head while you sleep might be symbolic. A lion power, a snake danger, a crocodile uh-oh. There were professional dream interpreters who'd tell you exactly what your visions meant, and they charged for it, of course. So yeah, even your sleep has a spiritual to-do list. And let's not pretend nighttime is peaceful. Jackals howl in the distance. The Nile makes eerie gurgling noises. There's always a risk of someone or something sneaking into your village. Thieves, crocs, spirits, you name it. And still somehow you drift off until the sun comes back, and it doesn't rise, it erupts, blasting into your reed hut like Ra himself is kicking open the door. It's morning again. You're covered in sweat. Your back hurts. The kids are already awake. The animals need feeding, and just like that, you do it all again. But let's pause here for a second, because now that you've got a feel for daily life, the labor, the faith, the fear, the food, let's zoom in on something you probably didn't expect: tombs. And what happens when people stop respecting them. Because here's a dirty little secret about ancient Egypt: death wasn't the end of your worries. If your afterlife plan was all wrapped up nice and neat in a tomb with your body mummified, your spells in order, and your valuables packed for eternity, you'd better hope no one finds it. Because tomb robbery was practically a national pastime. Let's break it down. You spend your whole life preparing for death. You save up. You commission a coffin. You stash amulets, tools, gold jewelry, maybe even some food. If you're royalty or high-ranking, you go big. Giant sarcophagus, art on the walls, canopic jars, magical scrolls, literal boatloads of stuff for your soul to use in the next life. And then, someone with a chisel and a little desperation shows up. Because to a tomb robber, your carefully prepared afterlife suite, it's a treasure chest, and the dead don't fight back. Tomb robbing happened almost immediately after the tombs were sealed. Sometimes even sooner. There are official records of investigations into grave robbery during the New Kingdom. There were trials, confessions. Even guards and temple workers got caught helping themselves to the goods. And the risks were huge. Get caught, and you could face exile, mutilation, or a very public execution. But still people did it, because poverty is relentless. And when your family is starving, a few gold rings in someone's tomb start looking a lot like survival. Even more ironic, sometimes the robbers were the same workers who built the tombs. Who else knew where the hidden chambers were? Who knew which passageways led to what? These weren't just random bandits. These were insiders. People who helped prepare the sacred spaces, then came back after dark to strip them clean. Some tombs tried to fight back with curses. You'll find inscriptions like, "May a serpent coil in your stomach forever," or "May your limbs rot in the desert." Dramatic stuff. Didn't work. Even the great pharaohs weren't safe. Many royal tombs were looted centuries ago. That's why the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in the 1920s was such a big deal. It was one of the few that hadn't been cleaned out. But even if your tomb wasn't rich, it was still at risk. Commoners buried with bread beer or personal trinkets could still have their graves disturbed. Why? Because in ancient Egypt, food was wealth, linen was currency, and if someone needed it, they took it. And what happens to your soul if your tomb is robbed? If your name is erased, if your body is exposed or destroyed, you risk spiritual annihilation. No afterlife, no field of reeds, no eternal peace. Just gone. That's why tombs weren't just burial chambers. They were security systems, time capsules, spiritual bunkers, and still they got cracked open. But you know what's even crazier? Despite all this, Egyptians kept building them. They kept preparing, because hope never died, even if your body did. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating and complex parts of ancient Egyptian life: writing. Not just how they recorded stories, but how they preserved souls. Because in Egypt, writing wasn't just communication, it was power, it was memory, it was magic, and it wasn't easy to learn. Let's talk about writing in ancient Egypt, because you've probably seen the symbols write birds, snakes' eyes, squiggly lines that look like art more than alphabet. But these weren't just decorations on temple walls. They were hieroglyphs, a full-blown writing system, and one of the most complex ever created. Now here's the wild part. Hieroglyphs weren't just about saying things. They were about preserving them. Writing your name in hieroglyphs wasn't just graffiti. It was a way to make sure your soul lived on forever. If someone erased your name, that was spiritual murder. No joke. But back to the writing itself. Hieroglyphs included over 700 different characters, and that number just kept growing. Some symbols represented entire words. Others represented sounds. And then there were determinatives, symbols that clarified what kind of word it was. So if you wrote the word star, you'd probably also draw a star just to be safe. Subtle right. Now there were no spaces, no punctuation, just long strings of artistic symbols packed into vertical columns or horizontal lines. And get this, it could be written left to right, right to left, top to bottom. It all depended on what direction the characters were facing. If the birds are looking left, read left. If they're looking right, read right. If they're upside down. Well, good luck with that. So who could actually read and write this stuff? Pretty much no one. Literacy in ancient Egypt was a niche skill. Maybe 1% of the population could read hieroglyphs. That's it. Because learning to write wasn't like learning the alphabet in preschool. It was a lifelong commitment. You started as a child memorizing hundreds of symbols, copying them again and again on potsherds and scraps of papyrus until your hand cramped and your patience evaporated. And those who succeeded, they became scribes. And scribes were powerful. Scribes didn't lift stones or grind grain. They sat in shade under temple eaves, writing tax records, official decrees, court documents, and sacred texts. They were the information hubs of society. The bureaucrats, accountants, poets, and historians all rolled into one. And they were respected. Because in a world where writing preserved the soul, the people who controlled writing basically controlled immortality. And hieroglyphs weren't just found in scrolls and ledgers. They were everywhere. On tomb walls, on temple columns, on statues, jewelry, even bread molds. Writing made things real. Writing someone's name in stone made it eternal, which is why pharaohs had their names everywhere. If they could have tattooed it onto the sun, they probably would have. And here's where it gets even more mystical. Writing itself was considered sacred. It was a gift from the god Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom and knowledge. Thoth didn't just give humans the ability to write, he wrote the laws of the universe. He recorded the weight of your heart in the afterlife. So writing wasn't just useful, it was divine. But remember, if writing could create eternity, it could also destroy it. Erasing someone's name from their tomb or statue wasn't petty vandalism, it was a direct attack on their afterlife. Wipe out their name, and you wipe out their soul. That's why damnatio memoriae, erasing someone from history, was such a powerful punishment. And that brings us back to your day in ancient Egypt. You're not a scribe. You're probably not even related to one, but you still understand the power of writing. You've seen names carved into mud brick walls. You've watched priests read from sacred scrolls during rituals. You know that the words matter, even if you can't read them. Now, speaking of rituals, let's take a breather from hieroglyphs and shift gears. You've survived the sand, the sun, the labor, the bread with built-in rocks, and the eternal spiritual to-do list. But let's get brutally honest for a moment. Would you survive a full day in ancient Egypt? Let's say we swap places. You modern, you wake up tomorrow on a straw mat in a reed hut on the banks of the Nile. No phone, no sunscreen, no toothbrush. Just a tunic, a task list, and a very judgmental sun god. Let's break it down. You're up before dawn. No coffee, just warm beer and coarse bread that chews back. You haul water from a river that smells like expired seafood. You swat bugs that carry more diseases than a frat house refrigerator. You sweat buckets in linen that's already stuck to your back by 9 a.m. By mid-morning, your arms are sore, your feet are blistered, and your stomach's considering a labor strike. You're either building something, farming something, or carrying something, and no one's giving you a gold star for effort. You can't complain, you can't take a break, and you certainly can't quiet quit. The sun is your boss, the pharaoh is your god, and if you collapse, someone else takes your grain quota, and you're out of luck. There's no air conditioning, no deodorant, no modern medicine. If you get sick, your best option is moldy bread and a spell about crocodiles. You're sleeping in a home with no doors, no privacy, and about 5,000 insect roommates. And you're doing all this with the constant fear that if you offend the wrong deity, you'll spend eternity as a soul snack for a hybrid demon. Now be honest, would you last a day? Probably not, and that's okay, because modern life has softened us in ways that ancient Egyptians couldn't even dream of. But here's what's wild. Despite all of this, despite the heat, the hard labor, the constant brush with death, ancient Egyptians weren't miserable. They had music, they had stories, they had gods they believed in, they had families, festivals, dancing laughter. They painted murals of beauty, told jokes on papyrus, sang hymns to the stars. They didn't just endure their world, they celebrated it. And somehow, their joy, despite all odds, has echoed across thousands of years to reach us now. Because even if we couldn't survive a single day in their sandals, we still talk about them. And that says something. All right, we've covered the sweat, the sand, the sacred rituals, and the reality that you'd probably crumble after 5 hours in ancient Egyptian shoes, if you were lucky enough to have shoes, that is. But before we head into the final stretch of your 24-hour crash course in the past, let's slow things down just a bit, because even in a world ruled by gods, sun and hard labor, ancient Egyptians still made time for one thing we all crave: leisure. Yep, it wasn't all work and suffering. When the crops were growing, the taxes were paid, and the sun wasn't trying to bake your soul, people found ways to relax, play, celebrate, be human. Let's start with games. The most famous, Senet. It's kind of like ancient backgammon, only the rules are, well, mostly lost to time. But we know this. It was a board game with pieces You moved based on throw sticks or knuckle bones, kind of like ancient dice. Senate wasn't just for fun either. It had a spiritual edge. The movement of your pieces represented your journey through the afterlife. Land wrong, and you're stuck in the shadowy lands. Land right, and you're free to move toward eternal peace. People played it everywhere. Poor rich priests, kids, even pharaohs. We found Senate boards buried in tombs, including King Tut's. Because what better thing to pack for the afterlife than your favorite board game? Another popular pastime, wrestling. Yep, ancient Egyptians were into sports. We've got paintings on tomb walls showing athletes grappling, flipping, pinning each other in front of cheering crowds. It wasn't just brute strength either. There were rules, strategies, maybe even local champs. Imagine ancient ESPN, but with more sand and less instant replay. They also loved music and dancing. Harps, flutes, lyres, tambourines. Egyptians had instruments for every occasion. Parties, rituals, funerals. Music was everywhere. And dancing, that was a big deal. There were even professional dancers, women who performed during religious festivals or fancy banquets. Now, speaking of banquets, let's talk about how ancient Egyptians partied. If you were lucky enough to be invited to a feast, especially one hosted by a noble or temple, you were in for a wild night. Picture this. You arrive at sunset. Torches flicker. There's music in the background, soft flutes and drums. Scribes and servants guide you into a courtyard lined with cushions. Someone hands you a cone of scented wax to wear on your head. Yeah, it sounds weird, but the heat melts it slowly, releasing perfume while you eat. Ancient Egypt's version of a diffuser. Platters, come out figs, pomegranates, honey cakes, roasted goose, maybe some lotus wine if the host is feeling fancy. You eat with your fingers, drink from ceramic cups, laugh at jokes that haven't aged well for 4,000 years. The dancers come in. They move with grace, wearing linen skirts and elaborate jewelry arms slicing the air to the rhythm of hand drums. The music builds. People sing. Some guests are tipsy. A few are very tipsy. The wine was strong, and the concept of moderation, not always a thing. These moments were rare, but they mattered. Because in a life filled with toil and survival, the chance to eat well, drink deep, and laugh with neighbors was more than a party. It was a gift, a glimpse of joy in a hard world. And joy in ancient Egypt wasn't just allowed, it was sacred. There was even a goddess of pleasure and music, Hathor. Her temples echoed with laughter and song. Her priests led celebrations, not just prayers. Life they believed was meant to be lived. Even kids got in on the fun. They didn't have toys the way we do now, but they made do. Wooden animals, clay dolls, spinning tops, carved balls made from papyrus and leather. You'd see children chasing each other barefoot through alleys, splashing in irrigation ditches, climbing trees, pulling pranks. Sound familiar? Some things never change. And family? Oh, it mattered deeply. Your home might have been small, hot, and full of bugs, but it was also full of connection. Grandparents lived with parents. Siblings slept side by side. You shared stories at night, told myths under the stars, whispered about dreams and omens, gossiped about neighbors. Families clung to each other because in a land of floods, famine, and divine surprises, people were your only constant. And that bond wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. Remember, if no one remembers your name, you disappear forever. So families kept your name alive. They offered bread and beer at your tomb. They lit incense. They whispered your story. That's how you lived on. So here you are, nearing the end of your ancient Egyptian day. You've worked, eaten, laughed, survived. The moon is high, the Nile is quiet, and somewhere a jackal howls in the dark. You lie down, bones aching, eyes heavy, heart beating, with the quiet hope that the gods will let you wake up again tomorrow. Because as hard as life was, it was still life. It still had warmth, purpose, music, faith. Even in a land ruled by pharaohs and flooded by rivers, there was space for love, for laughter, for legacy. You close your eyes, and the day ends. But your story, it's just beginning. The stars flicker above you. The desert air is cooler now, finally giving your sunburnt skin a break. The wind hums quietly through the reeds, and for the first time today, things are still. It's night in ancient Egypt, and that means one thing. The world is different now, because while the living sleep, the gods get to work. The sky above you, that's not just empty space. That's the goddess Nut stretching her body across the heavens. Every night she swallows the sun, and every morning she gives birth to it again. Yeah, cosmic childbirth, daily. Ancient Egyptians didn't mess around when it came to symbolism. And the sun god Ra, he's not taking a nap. He's on a nightly voyage through the Duat, the underworld. It's a terrifying journey. He battles chaos, incarnate fights serpents that try to swallow his light, and passes through 12 gates, one for every hour of the night. Every single night. Why? Because if he fails, the sun doesn't rise. And if the sun doesn't rise, you don't eat. You don't pray. You don't live. So, while you're dozing on your straw mat, hoping a scorpion doesn't wander across your arm, the cosmic struggle between light and darkness rages just above your head. And here's the thing. You're part of it. The Egyptians believed that everything was tied to this balance. Humans, gods, animals, even the Nile's flooding. If you don't live in harmony with Ma'at truth order balance, then everything falls apart. It's like being born into a contract. Your job? Do right. Respect the gods. Keep the peace. Because one out-of-line act, one disrespectful gesture, could ripple into the divine world and bring chaos down on everyone's heads. So when you wake up in the morning, it's not just another day. It's a victory, a blessing, proof that Ra won the fight. Again. That's why the morning rituals matter. Before breakfast, before work, you give thanks, you honor the cycle. You acknowledge that you're a tiny thread in a massive tapestry, and you try to pull your weight. Now let's zoom out for a second. We've spent a full day in ancient Egypt. And by now, you're probably wondering how much of this is real. How much is exaggerated? How much did ancient Egyptians truly believe, and how much was just tradition? The answer, both. Egyptian life was a fascinating mix of practicality and mysticism. They built irrigation systems that could rival modern engineering, and they believed cats had divine energy. They understood how to set bones and drain abscesses, and they thought spells could heal diseases. They were deeply spiritual, but also brutally efficient. They worshipped gods, but they also taxed the grain from your granary, and if you didn't pay, they showed up with soldiers. This was a civilization of contradiction. People who could build pyramids with perfect alignment to the stars, but who also believed that beetles symbolized resurrection because they rolled poop across the sand. And that's kind of incredible, because that blend, that marriage of science and spirit, math and magic, fear and joy, that's what made Egypt last. We're talking about a civilization that survived for over 3,000 years. To put that in perspective, America has existed for less than 300. Ancient Egypt lasted 10 times that, through invasions, famine, civil wars, natural disasters. They kept rebuilding, rewriting, reinventing, and always telling their stories in stone. Why does that matter? Because today, thousands of years later, we still know their names. We still say Nefertiti, Ramses, Tutankhamun. We still stare at hieroglyphs, wondering what they said. We still build museum wings just to house their relics. We still stand in front of temples and wonder how humans with no bulldozers carved entire mountains into art. And when we say their names, when we look at their art, their writing, their tombs, we're keeping them alive. Remember, in ancient Egyptian belief, to speak someone's name is to make them eternal. So even if their cities have crumbled, even if their gods have changed, even if their tombs have been raided and their rituals lost, we still honor them just by remembering. Now let's bring it back to you. You only lived one day in ancient Egypt, but that one day, it stretched across a whole universe of sound, sweat, spirit, and survival. You woke with the sun, labored with the earth, worshiped the sky, feared the unseen, laughed at the absurd, and dreamed of something more. That's not just a day in the past. That's a reminder of what it means to be human. So here we are, the end of the day, the end of your journey, one single day in ancient Egypt, and you're still standing. Barely. Covered in dust, drenched in sweat, maybe questioning all your modern luxuries. Or maybe appreciating them just a little more. But let's not rush past this moment. Let's take a second to reflect. You didn't just time travel. You lived it. You walked in the sandals of a farmer, a laborer, a mother, a child, a priest, a servant. You tasted the bread, felt the bite of the sun, looked up at the same stars that guided pharaohs and peasants alike. And now that you've seen it all, here's the question we end with. Why does it matter? Why should we care what life was like 3,000, 4,000, even 5,000 years ago? Because beneath all the rituals, the mummies, the gold masks, and sacred cows, ancient Egypt was just people. Ordinary, extraordinary people. Trying to survive. Trying to make sense of life and death. Trying to leave behind something that mattered. Sound familiar? They feared the unknown, just like we do. They dreamed of legacy, just like we do. They wanted their children to have better, just like we do. And they faced hard questions with creativity, resilience, and an unwavering belief that life, no matter how painful, meant something. They built pyramids so their stories could outlast the wind. And they succeeded. We remember them. We study them. We wonder how they did it. And sometimes we forget that we're doing the exact same thing. Sure, we've got phones and planes and Google Maps, but we're still carving our names into the walls of history. We still want to be known, still want to be heard, still want someone thousands of years from now to say, I remember them. So maybe that's what this journey was really about. Not just the heat or the bread or the gods, but the humanity behind it all, the shared pulse between the ancient and the modern. The realization that we've always been fighting for survival, for meaning, for connection. That's the magic of Egypt. Not just the tombs or temples, but the timelessness of their struggle, their spirit, and their story. So now you return to your world, to microwaves and mirrors and midday lattes. But something's changed, hasn't it? You've looked into the eyes of the past and realized they look a lot like yours. You've heard the heartbeat of a world long gone, and it's not so different from the one pounding in your chest. You've lived one day in ancient Egypt, and maybe, just maybe, a part of ancient Egypt now lives in you. Thanks for walking this path with me. And as the Egyptians would say at the end of every journey, may your name be spoken forever.